right, welcome to the Wild Way Home Podcast 2.0. We're starting again here in 2026 off strong. There's going to be some changes to the podcast. I started the Wild Way Home Podcast in 2025, and just like us as humans, we grow, we learn, we evolve, and we change. And so the podcast, while the through line will be the same, the mission is the same, some of the way that it sounds might be a little different because I have changed and evolved. So in 2025, when I started the podcast, I was going through a massive transition. I was in the middle of a hurricane of healing and learning and connecting the dots about a past that I had never really understood. And I just had a lot of pain that I didn't even recognize or know what to do with. And quite honestly, that I didn't even know was there for so many years. So the through line of every episode, as I filmed it last year, was what was the story or the experience? What was I going through? How did I feel about it? What was the lesson that I learned? What did it teach me? And how can I convey that to you so that you can apply it to your life? And a lot of the episodes I made in a diary series where I actually read entries from my diary, from journals that I've kept over the years. I did keep one general rule of thumb that if I was still in the middle of going through something, I didn't want to talk about it. So you may have noticed that a shift in speaking about relationships happened in the middle of the year where I started talking about other things and more about the patterns in our inner authority, compared to talking about my experience in abusive relationships or in controlling relationships, because I was still navigating that and I had gotten back into something that I didn't know what to do with yet at the time. And I think one of the most important pieces of integrity is you cannot lead where you're not willing to go. And so I've been very selective about the things that I say and the things that I share because I want to make sure that it's coming from an authentic place. And this year, the through line of every episode is the same. The mission is the same. I said that. What did I go through? What did I feel about it? What did it teach me? What can it teach you? And what I've cultivated over the last year was I actually began observing my thoughts quite a bit more, and a framework for how to observe them to go from this is the trigger or the experience that I'm going through and these are how I'm feeling about it, to follow this pyramid into what is the deeper meaning that it's pointing at. What's the core wound? What's the issue that I'm trying to compensate for or protect? And that was a really key piece in understanding all of these patterns that I had operating that were running my life and affecting the decisions that I made, the chances that I took or didn't take, and how you can apply it in your life. And that framework, now that I've broken it down and mastered it and moved things around and really studied it to understand it, I'm now teaching to my clients, and I want to teach it to you on the podcast so that you can understand how to observe your thoughts, how to not pathologize yourself when you have this pattern running because you have some trauma. You don't have to label yourself. You're just using an operating system that's outdated, that was there, that tried to protect you before, and we don't need it anymore. So we just have to follow the pattern through the pyramid that I'll teach you so that we can observe and choose differently. So starting in 2026, this year, the podcast will have the same through line. What was the experience? How do we feel about it? What did it teach us? And so I'm going to still be using my story, but I'm also going to be speaking on the patterns, on the pyramid, on how those patterns run through. I'm going to be talking about healing and triggers and how it affects us in relationships. You'll hear me talk about relationships quite a bit because that was a very painful piece of the puzzle for me and for a lot of people, because relationships are integral. We are made for belonging, and relationships can be some of the biggest pain points. They can make us miserable because our person is in our proximity all the time. And relationships are where we get triggered the fastest. It's where these patterns, where the invisible becomes visible very quickly. And so the patterns are the easiest to see in the relationships domain. So yes, you'll hear me talk about relationships quite a bit, But I want to be transparent and direct and say that it's not just relationships. These patterns run and span every domain of our life, from work to friendships to social, to how much money we make, to what we decide to do for our career, to how we make decisions, to how we think and talk to ourselves. And when you see the through line, you'll not only observe it in yourself, but you'll begin to observe it in other people. And you'll start to connect the dots and understand why we do the things we do, and hopefully have a little bit more empathy for why somebody did something the way that they did. But as you work through the patterns and as you recalibrate the operating system that's making your decisions so you can lead from your fullest version of yourself, just because you understand why somebody does something doesn't mean that you have to accept or tolerate it. And that's where a lot of the deeper meanings of the patterns point to I am not enough, or some variation of self-worth, or this I don't measure up pattern. Because those are the things that we tell ourselves. When we were a small child, we came to these simple conclusions based on needs not being met, based on things being too much for us to handle. And so we came to these conclusions that we were too much, that we were not enough, that we didn't measure up, that I'm dumb, that it's my fault. And so these are all of the deepest layers within us. And as we begin to work through those, you will have more self-worth. You will be able to set better boundaries and hold them because you know your worth. You can say, I'm not going to tolerate this in a relationship. You can have better discernment in relationships. You can stop entering into certain situations that aren't congruent with your values, that aren't congruent with the behavior traits that are your standard for letting somebody into your life. So I'm so excited to relaunch the Wild Way Home podcast with this in mind because I think it's going to be epic. So I've gone over how the podcast is changing. I want to share an update on what's been new with me, what I've been doing. There was a period where I was not posting as much on social media. There was a period where I was not active in producing podcasts. And the reason that I went silent during that time is I was managing my own life. I was in the middle of making a very big decision that I had been resisting for a long time. And ultimately, I ended up leaving a relationship with finality that was not good for me. And that was really hard because it was the fear of what happens after the conversation. It was my patterns of people pleasing and trying to avoid being punished, trying to avoid conflict. And so I did everything in my power to avoid that conversation because I couldn't control how it landed. Any way you shake it out, it turns out to, I'm done. And I pushed that off for so long. The other update in my life is that I walked away from the business that I built from scratch. I built it from the ground up to 7 figures, and I'm walking away without a dime because it's the best thing for me and because the conflict to try to come to an agreement just wasn't worth it. In my endeavors in healing and self-worth, I've recognized how to believe in myself, what I'm capable of, and how to trust myself to handle any situation that I get thrown into or that I choose. Part of putting myself in that position is trusting myself to get out of it. So, as that chapter closes, a really exciting chapter that I've been looking forward to for a very long time is opening, and that is stepping full-time with my full heart and my full energy into the Wild Way Home. The Wild Way Home coaching program is just the beginning. The Sisterhood Walk is coming to Louisville at the end of January, and it's going to be the first of many events in many locations to bring women together. And I wrote another book titled Monsters Like You, and it will be released later this year. Last year, there was a time where I shared that with every ending comes a new beginning. At that point, when I was going through a transition, I got together with some friends and I wanted to have a funeral birthday party mix for the end of one chapter and to celebrate the next. It wasn't my birthday, nobody died. but the chapter that I had been living and the story that I was telling myself did. And I was enthralled to step into the next chapter. The same goes for this point in my life. I'm so excited. I can't wait to connect with each person who's watching these videos, who's understanding the frameworks, who's changing their life. That's my mission. That's my purpose. That's my goal. Because each of these things that I'm doing are smaller steps on my larger mission, which is to help women understand their inside world, reclaim their agency, build lives and relationships that no longer require self-erasure, and build a future that they quietly wanted but never believed in themselves enough to create. This is the Wild Way Home.